Hello, I'm Jon Boschen, and welcome to my Classic Industrial Film Showcase. On this edition, we'll be taking a look at the 1948 masterpiece, The Inside Story of Modern Gasoline, also known as Gasoline's Amazing Molecules, a documentary film which was made by the Jerry Fairbank Studio and was sponsored and distributed by the Standard Oil Company of Indiana, Incorporated. This is one of my favorite industrial films that was made during the 1940s, as the film features a nostalgic feast for the eyes and joyful animation sequences, all accompanied by a well-animated musical score. This particular documentary was prepared for the Standard Oil Company of Indiana, which was one of many Standard Oil companies to be in the United States. These other Standard Oil companies, however, had absolutely nothing to do with this film. It was solely the Standard Oil Company of Indiana that commissioned this film to be made. The history of the Standard Oil Company of Indiana goes back to at least 1899, when a gentleman by the name of John D. Rockefeller founded and established the company as the Indiana-based subsidiary of the Standard Oil Trust, a company which Rockefeller established in 1870. The Indiana division was forced to become independent of the trust in 1911, as the Standard Oil Trust was ruled an illegal monopoly by the United States Supreme Court. The Standard Oil Company of Indiana was one of 33 companies the trust was dissolved into, and the company was assigned to sell gasoline in Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and of course Indiana. Our 1948 film, The Inside Story of Modern Gasoline, showcases the Red Crown and White Crown brands that the company was selling during the post-World War II era. The Red Crown regular brand was introduced prior to the 1911 monopoly breakup, while the White Crown Premium brand was introduced later on after 1911. The history of Crown gasolines is rather fascinating and is extensively discussed in the 2001 Petroleum Collectibles magazine article entitled How About Those Crowns? By Wayne Henderson. It's well worth the read if you are interested in learning more about the brand. In a nutshell, Red Crown Gasoline was the brand of gasoline all of the Standard Oil Trust Division sold. After being ruled an illegal monopoly, the Red Crown gasoline brand was still used by the various new companies. However, by 1948, the various different Standard Oil companies had retired the Red Crown image and had renamed their brands. For instance, the Standard Oil Company of Kentucky, KISO, changed their brand to simply Crown Gasoline, no color included. The Standard Oil Company of Ohio renamed the Red Crown brand as Sohio Ethyl, and shortly later, Sohio X70. That sounds like one of those diabolical weapons from a Republic movie serial, doesn't it? However, unlike the other companies, the Standard Oil Company of Indiana retained the Red Crown image as their regular brand. As a matter of fact, prior to 1948, the company marketed other Crown gasolines, represented by other colors. Their brands consisted of White Crown for ethyl, Blue Crown for Solite, and also some extremely short-lived brands such as Orange and Green Crown. By the time 1948 arrived, all of these brands, with the exception of Red Crown and White Crown, had been eliminated. This factor must have prompted an interest within the company to have a film made showcasing the Red and White Crown brands. Which brings us now to our 1948 film, The Inside Story of Modern Gasoline. There were two versions of this cinematic masterpiece that were made. One version, which had the title Inside Story of Modern Gasoline, was prepared for internal exhibition amongst Standard Oil gasoline station owners, distributors, and employees. This film ran about 22.5 minutes, and featured narration that was meant only for the people associated with Standard Oil. The other version, which was entitled Gasoline's Amazing Molecules, was made for exhibition to the general public. Interestingly, this version also runs in at 22.5 minutes. Both versions of the film were distributed in 16mm prints by the Public Relations Department of the Standard Oil Company of Indiana. The film was leased to Standard Oil franchise owners and station owners. While the internal version was shown to employees, the public version was exhibited throughout the franchise or station owners' community. Places of exhibition included meetings of local community clubs, schools throughout the community, factories of all types, and movie theaters or public auditoriums that were equipped with 16mm projection equipment. If the film was shown at a theater, it would have been incorporated into a movie program and exhibited as a short subject prior to a feature film. Individuals who attended screenings of the films were also treated to a complimentary souvenir booklet which featured colorful, vibrant artwork depicting scenes throughout the film to help summarize it. Now, since the film was made specifically by the Standard Oil Company of Indiana and not by any of the other Standard Oil companies, it was only exhibited in the Midwest states where the company marketed and sold their gasoline in, which, as I stated earlier, would have included Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri. In addition, by 1948, the Standard Oil Company of Indiana also acquired Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado to sell their gasoline in. Unfortunately, individuals who lived outside of these states were deprived of seeing this masterpiece. However, the general public and standard employees in the Standard Oil Company of Indiana's territory were in for a real treat, as this was a wonderfully made production which contained all kinds of showmanship tricks commonly found in the films made by the Jerry Fairbank studio. The Jerry Fairbank studio was owned and operated by a rather fascinating gentleman named Jerry Fairbanks. Mr. Fairbanks was a very ambitious filmmaker, a showman, and a man who contributed greatly to our motion picture heritage. He was also a licensed airplane pilot too, who would frequently fly to do location scouting for his films, shoot footage, and also to check up on his various film shoots that were being done on the North and South American continents. By the mid-1940s, Mr. Fairbanks' studio was producing both industrial films and also 3 theatrical short subject series that were distributed by Paramount Pictures. These 3 series, which was what the studio built their reputation and success on during the 1930s and 1940s, consisted of Unusual Occupations, a color novelty newsreel series which showcased unusual jobs and hobbies people had, Popular Science, another color novelty newsreel series which highlighted new inventions and technology. The subject matter of these films was based on stories featured in the Popular Science magazines. And Speaking of Animals, a black and white comedy series based around animals. These films featured animals acting out the parts in the films, and were accompanied by animation to make them appear to be talking.
Well, it's time to do a little cultivating there, hobo. Doggone, I have to do all the work around here.
This animation process was billed in the film's credits as the duoplane process. In addition to these 3 series, the Jerry Fairbank studio would also produce a one-shot theatrical short subject for Paramount every once in a while. All of these theatrical shorts were a fine addition to the wide variety of short subjects that were being distributed by Paramount Pictures. Many of these Paramount films that were produced by Fairbanks were extremely popular with movie audiences across the country and the world. As a matter of fact, several issues in the Popular Science, Unusual Occupations, and Speaking of Animals series were even nominated for an Academy Award, some of which even actually received an Oscar. The success of these films, especially the Popular Science shorts, which could easily be labeled as unofficial industrial films, must have inspired Mr. Fairbanks to expand the talents of his studio to the production of actual industrial films. In 1946, Mr. Fairbanks officially started the industrial and non-theatrical film production division of his company entitled Jerry Fairbanks Incorporated. To attract clients and market the division, he produced a non-theatrical advertising film marketing their talents for industrial film production, entitled Old Chinese Proverb, "One picture is worth 1,000 words." The film showcases everything the studio was doing during the post-war period to bring magic to the silver screen, which consisted of set design and building, the duoplane process, cartoon animation combined with live action, cameras capable of shooting microscopic scenes, and cameras capable of shooting X-ray footage. The 1948 Standard Oil films were certainly not the first industrial films to be produced by the studio. Unfortunately, I don't quite know offhand what those were. However, they are films that utilize many of the showmanship and storytelling techniques the studio was envisioning as a way to educate and entertain their audience. A 1948 review of the film written by Business Screen magazine raved about the film and the use of these cinematic techniques, especially the cartoon animation. Molecules with film personalities are at work telling the inside story of modern gasoline. They appear in sound and color in the new 16mm picture completed by the Standard Oil Company of Indiana. Audiences seeing the picture will come away knowing how gasoline is made, what gasoline is, how it performs, and how specialized it has become in supplying greater and more economical power for automobiles today. Other trade magazines, such as Chemical News Parade, thought very highly about the film, especially the cartoon sequences. After viewing the film on my own, I can honestly agree with the trade ads that while the film is great, it's really the cartoon animation that steals the show. The cartoon animation is a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, it's right on par with the theatrical cartoons that were being produced by the major Hollywood cartoon studios at the time. One specific trait that was put to full use in the animation as an educational aid was the use of color. The film, which made use of Kodak's, then in 1948, new 16mm commercial Kodachrome, utilized color as a way to differentiate specific molecules. This filmmaking technique, which was raved about and highly applauded in Business Screen magazine and the Chemical News Parade, allowed audiences to easily follow and understand certain processes, such as how crude oil was separated into the various different petroleum-based products. Now, unfortunately, I don't know exactly who is responsible for the animation in this cartoon, as the film unfortunately does not have any credits indicating who did what. The only person who is technically credited in the credits is Jerry Fairbanks, who was the executive producer of the film. However, after consulting with a few different animation historians such as Jerry Beck and Don Yelp, and also doing some research on my own, I think I may have a pretty good educated guess on at least two different individuals who may have contributed this asset to the film. The first is a gentleman by the name of Lou Lilly. Mr. Lilly, even though there is no on-screen credit for him in the film, is credited along with Jerry Fairbanks in the film's copyright entry in the Library of Congress's copyright catalog as one of the film's creators. To give you a brief overview of who Mr. Lilly was, he was, as stated by the Fairbanks Studio trade ads, an animated cartoon expert who came to work for Fairbanks in 1944. He was frequently assigned to direct many of the Speaking of Animals comedies, some of which were even nominated and won an Academy Award. Prior to coming to work for Fairbanks, Lilly worked for the Warner Brothers cartoon studio, where he was a writer and an animator for several of their cartoons. Going back to our Standard Oil films, if Lilly didn't do the animation, he certainly may have been the director and even the writer of them. Another person who I believe may have been responsible for the animation in this film is a lady by the name of Anna Osborne. Mrs. Osborne was the head animator at the Jerry Fairbanks studio and was responsible for a lot of the animation that was used in the duoplane process. Two cinematic elements that help bring out the joy in the animation sequences and also in the live-action footage are the narration and musical score. The narration to the film was actually done by two completely different actors. The first and most recognizable narrator, who actually performs his narration as the animated carbon atom,
Hello, folks. I'm a carbon atom, and
is Ken Carpenter, who also provides the narration for the vast majority of the film. Ken Carpenter was one of two narrators the Jerry Fairbank studio had on their payroll. His pleasant voice was heard frequently in many of the popular science and unusual occupation installments. He also provided the narration to other industrial films made by the Jerry Fairbank studio. Anyways, seeing how the narration is presented to us by a carbon atom and not by Ken Carpenter himself, I guess it would be appropriate to name this fellow as Ken Carpenter. The second actor, who also provided narration to the film, was another radio announcer named Jon Boschen, whom we are introduced to 3/4 into the film, in which he portrays a Standard Oil salesman. Mr. Heiston, unlike Ken Carpenter, was not on the Jerry Fairbanks payroll, and therefore was not featured or used in many of Fairbanks' films. Around the time the Standard Oil productions were made, Mr. Heiston was a radio announcer for various programs that were produced by NBC. In addition, he was also a narrator for various film productions that were either sponsored or non-sponsored films. One other audio asset that not only adds to the animation, but also to the live-action footage, is the musical score. I personally love the musical score to this film. It was composed by a gentleman by the name of Eddie Paul. Mr. Paul was the musical director at the Jerry Fairbank studio and did the music for all of the studio's films. Paul was also one of Jerry Fairbanks' best assets in that he used music to really animate and bring out the best in Fairbanks' films. Many, if not all, of Paul's scores that were composed for Fairbanks' films have a rather cartoony sound to them, as they utilize all kinds of public domain tunes, folk songs, classical music, and other well-known tunes as well. Paul applied this technique to the score he composed for the Standard Oil films, as he incorporated tunes such as Ding Dong Bell, Puss Fell in the Well,
then another carbon. In doing this, we make a kind of chain.
Mary Had a Little Lamb, and also Turkey in the Straw, to name a few.
And now, folks, you are watching science change a molecule into more useful ones.
The score also makes use of other tunes as well, giving this film a lot of character and making it extremely enjoyable. After listening to the score, you'll probably agree with me that Edward Paul was a musical genius, and one who should be recognized the same way other film composers such as Carl Stalling are today. While the cartoon animation, the vocals, and the musical score certainly steal the show, one other great asset to the film is the live-action footage, which, believe it or not, actually has some pretty cool history behind it. All of these shots were framed up utilizing the new 16mm Mitchell professional camera, a camera that was produced by the Mitchell Camera Company. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Mitchell Camera Company, the company made 35mm motion picture cameras that were considered the standard for film production in Hollywood. The vast majority of motion picture studios used Mitchell cameras for film production. The 16mm camera was introduced in 1945 and was described by several different trade ads as a brother to Mitchell's 35mm camera. Due to the unique features and capabilities of the 16mm camera, it was confined to the United States Army and Navy for use in World War II. The following year, in 1946, the camera was finally made available to civilians, where it received raved reviews from several different trade ads and filmmakers. One studio who took an interest in using this camera was the Jerry Fairbank studio, who began using it for their industrial films, such as The Inside Story of Modern Gasoline. According to Business Screen magazine, Inside Story was one of the first civilian films to use the Mitchell 16mm camera. Those are just some of the many cool facts surrounding this production. So here from 1948 is the internal version of gasoline's amazing molecules, the inside story of modern gasoline. Enjoy.
Two great gasolines, Standard Red Crown and Standard White Crown. The fuels that power this modern age. On the highways, on the farm, and their kindred aviation fuels in the air. Here is the inside story of these modern gasolines.
Hello, folks. I'm a carbon atom, and since I'm an essential part of each of the hydrocarbons in crude oil, I'm here to give you the inside dope on gasoline. I'm the smallest possible particle of carbon. Why, I'm so small, 1,000 billion atoms like me could dance on the head of a pin. Scientists know I act as though I had 4 arms, and these fellows, who are the hydrogen members of this combination, have only 1 arm. We're going to form a molecule. Watch. I grab hold of hydrogens like this, then another carbon. In doing this, we make a kind of chain. See? When we're together, the combination is a hydrocarbon molecule, one of the many, many different hydrocarbons. For instance, we have formed a typical gasoline molecule. Now I want you to meet some of my relatives who form in the same way but have different patterns.
I'm another hydrocarbon, a gas molecule.
My size makes me a typical kerosene molecule.
I'm one of the fuel oil molecules.
A light lubricating oil molecule. That's me.
I'm a heavy lubricating oil molecule.
All of these carbons and hydrogens make me a residual materials molecule.
So you see, there are lots of different molecules, different sizes, different shapes, all found in crude oil. Still the best raw material for the great motor fuels of today. From it, science builds gasoline, selecting the groups of molecules wanted and changing their sizes and shapes as required. To do this job, calls for great storage tanks to maintain a constant supply of crude oil. Batteries of pumps. A maze of valves and pipes. Mighty facilities. And an army of experienced, specially trained workers. The first step is to separate the crude oil into the parts that you saw a moment ago. This is done by distillation. You know that when you boil water, the vapors can be condensed. The same principle is used in distilling crude oil. Giant units with bubble towers condense vapors just as the cold tumbler did. Here in a single tower, much simplified, crude oil is separated into the different fractions needed for gasoline, kerosene, fuel oil, and other petroleum products. Here we see the crude oil being heated. Most of it is vaporized. At the bottom of the bubble tower, unvaporized large molecules of heavy lube oil and residual materials are drawn off. At the second level, the light lube oil is condensed out of the vapor and withdrawn. At the third level, the largest of the lighter remaining molecules condense to form the fuel oil cut. At the fourth level, kerosene is condensed and drawn off. At the fifth level, the gasoline molecules become liquid, leaving the very light gas molecules to go out the top of the bubble tower. In the average crude oil, only a limited amount of gasoline is present. So let's see what we might get from this simple distillation. A barrel of crude oil produces 20% residual fuel oil and asphalt, 7% lube oil and wax, 39% gas oil and fuel oil, 15% kerosene, 1% gas, and gasoline only 18%. Not nearly enough for today's millions of cars. But scientists of the Standard Oil Company, Indiana, invented the cracking process, enabling refiners to make more than twice as much gasoline from each barrel of crude. Today, were it not for the demands for fuel oil and diesel fuel, almost the whole barrel could be converted into gasoline. By making more gasoline, cracking has conserved our natural resources and at the same time made gasolines of higher anti-knock quality for greater performance and economy. Here's a typical gas oil molecule to be cracked. You are already familiar with the way it's constructed. To crack it, heat is applied under precisely controlled conditions, more heat than is needed for distillation. And now, folks, you are watching science change a molecule into more useful ones. On the left are two gasoline molecules. On the right are gas and carbon, all obtained from cracking one gas oil molecule. Thus, science creates gasoline where none existed before, high anti-knock gasoline. Here are some of the great units that do the cracking. And here's one that cracks tens of thousands of barrels of gas oil each day. Standard's continuing leadership was also strengthened by other processes. One is called polymerization. It simply takes molecules that are too small for gasoline, such as these gas molecules, unites them by the polymerization process to form a larger molecule, a gasoline molecule of exceptionally high anti-knock value. Thus, science again fashions for us more and better products. By a somewhat different process, this alkylation unit joins together two different molecules to make another high-octane gasoline component. And this unit, a hydroformer, changes the shape of molecules and takes out some of their hydrogen to make still more high anti-knock material. Finally, a process where cracking is affected by a catalyst, a reaction promoter that itself remains unchanged. The most modern method uses catalysts in a fine powder that will flow like a fluid. Here's what happens inside a fluid catalytic cracker. Gas oil is heated. It is joined by the hot, finely powdered catalyst shown here as little white grains. The hot oil and the still hotter catalyst then move together through pipes up into a chamber called the reactor and are tumbled about. Here the heavy oil molecules are cracked by catalytic action to produce gasoline molecules shown in red. These move out at the top. As the catalyst becomes covered with coke, it becomes less active and is drawn off at the bottom. Air blows it through a pipe to the regenerator. where the coke is burned off. This reheats the catalyst, which again joins the flow of incoming oil. Here's the entire operation, showing the complete cycle. Notice that the same catalyst is used over and over again in this, the most modern method of gasoline manufacture. It takes a complicated unit to do the job. Every 2 minutes, a whole carload of catalyst passes through the lines. 16 stories high, each of the company's big cat crackers can produce enough gasoline in 1 day to last the average motorist 1,000 years. Contrast the modern unit you have just seen with this historic Burton cracking still at Whiting, Indiana, the first successful commercial cracking unit. Though the amount of oil in today's catalytic cracking units is actually less than in the old Burton units, the catalyst cracks the gas oil more than 7,000 times faster, and so permits much greater throughput. It is one more demonstration of leadership through science. To build top gasoline performance today, there are 2 major requirements: proper volatility and proper anti-knock quality. Let's take the first one, volatility, the tendency to change from liquid to vapor. The driver may not know a cat cracker from a firecracker, but he knows when his engine starts. And he wants it to warm up without coughing and sputtering. But starting and warm-up are not the whole story. In all seasons, the motorist wants quick acceleration. He wants economy, too. Mileage, and that calls for a scientific balance of gasoline components. You know how easy it is to ignite gas, which is made up of small molecules. Here's a mixture of liquid hydrocarbons so light and volatile that the heat of a hand will make it boil. It's inflammable and so volatile it ignites plenty fast. Now here are some of the heavier, less volatile hydrocarbons. The lighted taper does not ignite them, yet when vaporized and burned in an engine, they pack a lot of power and give mileage. To make a gasoline blend that will have a proper combination of volatility characteristics, first we put in the very light hydrocarbons for quick starting. The next heavier ones have rapid warm-up. Then some that give instant acceleration, and the final portion for full power and good mileage. The blended gasoline has the desired range of performance with economy because it contains just the right groups of hydrocarbon molecules. One for instant starting, but so active that in the summer he should be used only in moderation. One for rapid warm-up. One for smooth acceleration. And one for full power and good mileage. Molecules that work together, a harmonious team. In the engine laboratory, by means of a glass intake manifold, you can actually see one of the volatility differences between fuels. Slowing down the action, here's what too low volatility causes: a wet manifold and imperfect distribution. These liquid droplets decrease engine performance, waste mileage, and dilute the crankcase oil. Switching to a fuel with proper volatility, vaporization is complete and there's no waste. To assure trouble-free performance at all times, fuels are tested out on the road as well as in the laboratory, in all types of engines and under all of the different seasonal and climatic conditions of use. Under city driving, and trip conditions in hot weather and cold. Seasonal variations and the climates of different regions must be taken into account. That is why the Standard Oil Company, Indiana, adjusts volatility to suit the season and the region in which its gasolines will be used. A distillation test measures the volatility of motor gasoline. The results here plotted form a typical distillation curve for a gasoline of proper volatility. Now for the next major requirement, the prevention of fuel knock.
The motorist wants smooth, controlled application of power. Using a special demonstrator, I shall show the difference between poor performance and good performance. Now, with the hard face of this mallet, I strike the piston. The piston, you see, receives a punishing rap, showing how power is wasted when gasoline knocks. This time, I shall use the cushion face of the mallet to show what happens when gasoline does not knock. Smooth, useful power propels the piston, sends the crank spinning. The performance difference you've seen is a mighty important one that you ought to understand better. So let's look inside the engine by means of animation and see what happens when the fuel burns. These gasoline molecules have not been improved on or controlled by science. They are untamed and unruly. What you will see next actually takes place in about 1/500th of a second. First, the spark ignites the compressed fuel charge. Now, watch for the knock. In this greatly slowed down action, you could see that with this gasoline, combustion was uneven and uncontrolled, and at the end there was a jarring, violent explosion, a knock that pounded and shook the engine. Now we shall repeat the action. Watch again for the knock. Now, with gasoline made up of molecules that have been science-fashioned so that they have the required anti-knock quality, molecules that stay under control and work as a team, let's see what happens. Note in this case that the combustion is more uniform and there is no knock. The big difference, as you could see, is that with gasoline of the required anti-knock quality, there is no knock. Combustion is smooth and even and completely under control. Now we shall repeat the action. Watch how the combustion proceeds as it should, smoothly and without the interference caused by knocking. In the modern high compression engine, modern gasoline gives the greater performance required today. The car accelerates more rapidly, climbs hills faster, travels more miles per gallon. In addition to fashioning the molecules to prevent fuel knock, refineries usually add minute quantities of tetraethyl lead to help accomplish the same purpose. This model shows how just the right amount of fluid containing tetraethyl lead and dye is added to the gasoline. In the knock testing laboratories, test engines are used to make sure that the proper anti-knock quality has been built into Standard Oil's gasolines. The high anti-knock reference fuel is called isooctane, hence the expression octane number. This test engine is equipped with a dial indicator that shows just how badly the engine is knocking. With a fuel of low octane number, here's how it sounds. Switching to a high octane number fuel, the knocking diminishes and finally fades out completely. This illustrates the smooth, even performance you get from standard red crown and standard white crown.
The engineer has had his say, but modern processes and skillful know-how are not enough. There must also be safeguards. You can depend on it that Standard Oil Company, Indiana, constantly checks and inspects its fuels by every needed control test. For example, the vapor pressure test that controls vapor lock tendencies. A test to make sure there is no harmful gum. Another to make sure that today's fine gasolines will not deteriorate in storage. A test that guards against corrosive impurities. Testing, testing, testing. Another of the 1,500 and more daily control tests. In addition, these great laboratories are entirely devoted to extensive research. Carried on by hundreds of capable scientists, working on more and still better products for the future. Cooperative work with the automobile industry guarantees that the right gasoline will always be available for any car that's developed. Put all of this together and you have what it takes to deliver today's and tomorrow's great motor fuels. Huge units like this super fractionator and the other multi-million-dollar units that go to make up the great modern refineries of the Standard Oil Company, Indiana. With the tradition of pioneers behind us and better facilities ahead of us, future progress leading to still finer products is assured. So there's the story, folks, and I'm proud to be a part of it, even if only as a tiny atom inside modern gasoline. This is what's behind the gasoline you sell, whether from tank truck or on the service station driveway. Behind these symbols of service is a great record of scientific achievement that certifies today's leadership and guarantees tomorrow's.
I think you'll agree with me in that the animated molecules were certainly the show stealers of that production. Now, as I stated earlier, attendees of the film, both the general public and employees of the Standard Oil Company of Indiana, received souvenir booklets that featured the animated molecules discussing the inside story of modern gasoline. The booklets contained colorful, vibrant artwork depicting specific animated scenes throughout the film. Like the film, the booklet makes use of color as an educational aid to depict specific molecules. Looking at this book, it's interesting to compare the artwork to the available print of the Standard Oil films. As you probably observed, the existing 16mm print of the inside story of modern gasoline is kind of worn out. The artwork featured in this booklet allows us, the audience, to see what the original look and vision of the film was. Now, speaking of the animated molecules, one thing I didn't quite discuss in my introduction was who provided the voices to the animated molecules during the sequence in which we are introduced to Ken Carpenter's family of gas molecules. As you probably observed, none of the molecules were voiced by Ken Carpenter or Bud Heiston. As a matter of fact, all of them seem to be voiced by different individuals. Unfortunately today, nobody seems to know exactly who provided these voices. Several film historians such as Jerry Beck, Don Yelp and Keith Scott believe that several vocal artists and actors such as Stan Freberg, Frank Nelson, and Don Messick may have provided the voices to these molecules. Anyways, mysteries aside, if you enjoyed the inside story of modern gasoline, I highly recommend visiting the Prelinger archives on archive.org. This film, along with many other wonderful public domain industrial films, are all available for both viewing and downloading, courtesy of Rick Prelinger. I hope you enjoyed this installment of the Classic Industrial Film Showcase. I look forward to seeing you again on my next installment. Have a good one.